Chapter 14. The Saxon chieftain confronts Hofsos, rise proudly from kneeling supplication, and with defiance meet scornful gaze. For even in love, a Briton should be a subject, not a slave. So wrote Wordsworth, and such fiery spirit is found in Count Hofsos and his daughter Elfrida, as they shared a rare moment of peace in their crimson parlour. The room was adorned in rich crimson cloth, the product of the looms of Avignon, and basked in the comfort of dark oak wainscoting. However, even amid this luxury, the boisterous drinking and revelry of their followers in the kitchen caused an unwelcome disturbance. Allow me to introduce the Count and his accomplished daughter more intimately. The Count, having lived a soldier's life, was over 55, with a face marked by sunburn and tough experience. His once black hair now silvered, but his countenance remained haughty and imperious, reflecting his autocratic nature. Lady Elfrida, his daughter, resembled him in appearance, with a tall and elegant bearing, raven locks cascading down to her girdle, and a complexion that spoke of her southern lineage. Her lustrous dark eyes blazed with intensity from behind darker lashes. She stood before him, a true paragon of royal beauty. Like many of her compatriots in high position, she had been educated in the seclusion of the convent, where one could truly receive an education worth having. This withdrawn life, despite her passionate heritage, had mellowed her disposition, while the education and cultivation had resulted in her being a prime example of the romantic and troubadour spirit of song, known to be developed in the maidens of sunny France. For her, the violent life of the Norman occupation, with its blood and savagery, was an everyday horror. "Elfrida," the Count began, "a while back I informed you of my betrothal between you and Baron Valdis. He has followed my crusade and lent the prowess of himself and his mercenaries towards achieving my goals, in return for which he was to wed you. I gave him my solemn word in that regard. However, his recent behavioral patterns have not pleased me, and his addiction to drinking has become insatiable. But I hold the rough times we've had responsible, and I'm certain that when calm times return, he will turn into a sober and righteous Norman baron. Regardless, I gave him my promise, and he has kept up his end of the bargain. Now he asks to invoke that promise. You've had a long time to prepare, so decide when it is to be fulfilled. You're the one to determine when this event will take place, and my promises will be kept. I implore you not to look down on him, because although he is a landless mercenary, he is courageous and has many influential acquaintances." "Father, this wedding is repugnant to me. In fact, it is quite disgusting. The Baron is a man I could never love. If he's after my wealth, he can have it with pleasure. I care not if I'm poor, as long as I'm free. Indeed, I would rather become a nun than marry him if I'm given no other option." "My dear Elfrida, this cannot be. Breaking my vow is not an option. This man has fatally compromised me, and I am fighting for my life. Hear me out," he said, pacing the room with nervous energy. "When the Saxon insurrection began, I was still reeling from the mistreatment I received from my enemies. I counted the rebel forces and foolishly thought William's reign would end. But in my blinded rage, I entrusted letters to Valdis, revealing my treasonous intentions. These compromising letters now hang over me like a sword, and Valdis threatens to reveal all to William. The consequences of this would be dire. My life is literally on the line." He paused to take a breath, adding, "I share this with you so that you might have a better understanding of my predicament. However, I cannot stall Valdis any longer. The sooner we marry, the better, to free myself of his grip on me." A deafening silence followed his words as Elfrida struggled to process the gravity of the situation. Then, suddenly, the door creaked open, and a chorus of revelers' voices drowned out their thoughts. As the Count seethed with anger at the joyous gathering, Ragnvald the Saxon suddenly burst into the room, shield and buckler in hand, sword drawn. The accomplice's shadowy figure flickered briefly before the door slammed shut, cutting off all sound and leaving the three to face each other alone. The Count sprang up, wildly unsheathing his sword and taking up a fighting stance, ready to fend off the sturdy Saxon. Elfrida, too, jumped up with a start, taken aback and gripped by a strange sense of panic. Had the Saxon whom she saved come to kill her and take his revenge? His menacing appearance certainly suggested it, and she cursed herself quietly for the position into which she had put herself. peace, lady," Ragnvald said, with a humble bow, his tone at odds with his militaristic stance and battle gear. "I come in peace, though in these times we need to be prepared for anything. Forgive my weapons and my abrupt visit, kind lady." "What do you want, Saxon?" challenged the Count. "How brazenly you have intruded." "Intrude, my lord? Begging your pardon, but my father built this castle, and it is my birthplace and my inheritance. I am not the intruder here. You seized my lands, took my home, and slaughtered my vassals, making me homeless, landless, and outlawed." "You are lucky to be alive, Saxon," sneered the Count, "and all the more foolhardy to risk your neck twice in one lifetime." "I did not come to make threats, my lord, but it's not my neck that's in danger right now. If not for your powerful patron, your life would soon be forfeit. Mark that, Norman, and be more merciful." "You lie, Saxon cur. I fear neither you nor any other boar in the land," growled the Count, swinging his weapon. Elfrida leaped desperately between them, desperate to prevent a fight from breaking out. "Pray, fair lady, forgive my hastiness," uttered Ragnvald. "I have come not to spill blood, but to request an honourable truce and an end to the animosity and hostility between us. On this night, I humbly ask that you be our arbitrator, gentle lady." "What truce do you want, Saxon?" asked the Count. "There is but one truce between a victor and a foe defeated and routed. It requires the latter to disarm and accept mercy and kindness from the conqueror." "That term is unacceptable," replied Ragnvald. "We shall defend our freedom at any cost. The Normans should beware of provoking desperate men. If your audacity equalled your might, Saxon, you could achieve greatness. Alas, if there is no unconditional surrender, I shall eradicate every last one of you from your mountain hideouts within a month. However, if you and your followers return and accept my terms, you will become my vassals and shall receive my protection. I will designate some lands for you if you swear fealty and commit to rendering me any service requested as my liege lord." "Forgive me, noble sir, but those terms are preposterous," boldly stated Ragnvald. "Firstly, I will not subordinate myself to be a lowly feudal subject, forced to wear clunky shoes and a slave's collar, to beg for your approval before going on a journey or hunting game, fishing or marrying a wife. I will not hold the stirrup for penniless Norman adventurers, and conceive myself as subservient to all their whims and fancies, afraid of breathing or even walking or claiming my manhood. I will not be recognized as your chattel or beast of burden. That must be unequivocally understood. No drop of vassal's blood runs in my veins or animates my spirit. I fear no man, Saxon or Norman, and refuse to be any man's vassal. Leave me in solitude with the few Saxons who are loyal to me. My lands and home may be yours to claim as the spoils of war, but be content with that. There is ample land for all, and we are content to till a little peace for sustenance and be your allies. Perhaps some of the serfs will willingly return to their lands and vassalage, and those who choose to do so may freely." "You come to dictate terms, not to plead them, Saxon," he replied with disdain. "Do you think I will allow a petty Saxon chieftain to hold sway near my door, or harbour on my lands a nest of villains who will betray me in times of crisis? You underestimate my wisdom. Listen well, Saxon. If you do not surrender immediately, I will hunt you down like rabbits in your warren within a month, and few will survive, mark my words." "Father," Elfrida protested, "you are doing this noble Saxon a disservice by rejecting his amicable overtures so rudely. A little bit of mercy may go a long way. I pledge myself to be his bond, and these Saxons will appreciate any acts of kindness. Besides, you saw the armed men at the door. They could have struck earlier, but have chosen not to." "Nonsense," he retorted. "These crude Saxons will see mercy as a sign of weakness. Enough of this talk." "Thank you, lady," Ragnvald intervened. "Gentle ways are the strongest when dealing with human beings, whether they are simple or sophisticated. But farewell. If my mission fails, the responsibility is not mine, for I have offered peace, a peace that is humiliating on your terms." And with that, Ragnvald turned and rapped on the oaken door with the hilt of his sword. The locked door opened and then shut as quickly as it had opened, and the heavy bolt slammed in place from the outside. With a quick leap, the Count rushed towards the door, desperately trying to force it open, but his efforts proved fruitless. "Jules! Jules!" he bellowed. "What is the meaning of this betrayal?" but the only answer he received was a piece of a raucous tune that echoed from the distant kitchen. Chapter 15. Outlaws and Wolf's Heads. The adage, to be forewarned is to be forearmed, holds true even in the realm of power struggles, as evidenced by Count Hofsos's swift actions upon hearing the bold words of Ragnvald. The conqueror would brook no hint of dissent or rebellion from the subdued Saxons, and thus immediately organized an expedition to quell any such resistance. The sudden reappearance of Ragnvald only heightened the Count's paranoia, leading to increased security measures around the castle. Meanwhile, Skuggi had cleverly positioned himself among the Normans, learning their plans and movements while enjoying their company in outdoor activities. He shared with me their latest scheme, prompting us to quickly inform our fellow Saxons. Under cover of night, Skuggi set out on his trusty steed Shaggy, accompanied by his loyal hound Grizzly. They moved swiftly and quietly, the only noise coming from the distant wildlife. When they reached the hills, Skuggi dismounted and led the way on foot, and eventually remounted Shaggy for a breakneck ride that sent various creatures fleeing. Skuggi rode steadily towards the towering peaks that rose out of the darkness, casting ominous shadows against the twinkling starry sky. He climbed patiently, inching closer to the top. Taking the path between two peaks, he quickened his pace when suddenly two horsemen charged towards him with swords drawn. One of them cried out, "Are you Saxon or Norman?" "Saxon!" Skuggi shouted back. "Down with the Normans!" Recognizing his voice, the horsemen sheathed their swords and greeted him with a hearty laugh. "Well, aren't you a survivor, Skuggi? We expected you to be dead and eaten by now. You would make quite a profit for your skins in this chilly weather." "Better shed those skins, or you'll be losing your own," the second horseman added. "Skuggis are just carrion after all." "We're glad to see you unharmed," they said, their joy almost enough to lead them to embrace him. "What news do you have? Has the castle been burned down? Are they slaughtering everyone?" "They'll have quite a time trying to kill the likes of you unless they learn to fly," Skuggi replied. "You take good care of your own hides, but I'm sure they'll be intact unless you trip and fall while running away." The horsemen roared with laughter. "When the time comes, we'll be the first to slice through the Normans' throats." "In due time, my comrades. The morning brings inevitable disturbance to your abodes, providing an opportunity for you. However, I cannot tarry here. I must consult with Ragnvald without delay. This location shall serve as our temporary quarters for the evening, Skuggi. It is highly likely that this valley shall be targeted for an attack, whether by day or night. We must maintain vigilant watch until the break of dawn. Oh, come now. I am assured that all is presently in undisturbed tranquillity. The Normans remain dormant, I guarantee. Your assistance would prove invaluable accordingly, if you are willing to take on the responsibility, Skuggi. I am most eager to do so without hesitation." The two then led their steeds onward, joining Skuggi on his mission. As they traversed the moor, they heard a fierce baying to their right, and thereafter spotted a half-dozen wolves bearing down towards them. The horses trembled and displayed indications of bolting. The three dismounted, standing before the horses and facing the approaching wolves, with Grizzly's fierce growls at the forefront. The equine creatures seemed calmed by this display, although the wolves, realizing they had misjudged their target, turned tail and fled. Grizzly chased after them with a fierce growl, pouncing on the last wolf and wrestling it to the ground. Clasping its throat, Grizzly would have hastened its end were it not for the intervention of the horsemen, who dispatched the wolf with their swords. The creature, a gaunt dog-wolf, would have posed a dangerous threat towards an untrained individual during a time of famine. I trust they have secured the flocks of sheep, cattle, and swine properly. Should they have neglected to do so, these creatures shall likely become targets of these beasts that prowl about, remarked one horseman. Such creatures are becoming too numerous to be pleasant. There has been scarce time for wolf hunting since the arrival of the Norman invaders. These creatures grow increasingly audacious, and now hunt in groups, commented the second horseman. I wish our foes were not so wily, Skuggi remarked. If only they were simple-minded, we would have a much easier time. But these nefarious Normans, they cling to us like a stubborn vine. The rapacious swarm has overrun all the land, and there will soon be no plot of soil left for a Saxon to call home. It seems as though we shall all be slaves or starve before long." "Count me out, Scuggy," one of his companions replied. "I have no kin to protect, and my freedom is worth everything to me. The limestone caverns and the verdant forests shall be my shelter. And as for starving, I will not suffer from hunger if any Norman on this side of Baldley Heights or Whernside Fell has a sheep or an ox in their fold or stall." "Fret not, comrades," Scuggy encouraged. "When the winds change, so do our fortunes. No river is too wide that it cannot be crossed. The strongest bow is the first one to sag, and our time will come, for these Normans are not like the Viking raiders of old. They are fond of luxury and sloth, and that will be their downfall. If we cannot drive them out, we can at least make ourselves comfortable alongside them." As they talked, the three made haste, leaving their Norman pursuers far behind. But ahead of them, an immense, desolate moorland stretched out endlessly. In the pale moonlight, mist crept along the hills and swamps, like the memories of an ancient time. These towering peaks seemed to dwarf human existence, standing as everlasting hills, unyielding to the caprices of winter storms or the warm glow of summer days. They were indifferent to the brutal conflict raging around them, and offered little sympathy or shelter to weary fugitives in search of refuge. "Stay to the left, Scuggy," one of the companions warned. "We must skirt around the edge of that fog, or we will be knee-deep in bog. We don't have far to go now. Do you see the tips of those fir trees above the boulders? That is where we will find our leader, Ragnvald." Soon the figures of two scouts appeared, moving among the rocks and examining the newcomers. One of them let out a low, piercing whistle, which was promptly answered by Scuggy's companions. They approached to interview the strangers, and as they did, it became apparent that the treetops were only the outermost layer of a dense forest bordering a colossal ravine. At the bottom of the gorge, a tranquil lake or tarn glistened in the hollow. "Is Ragnvald here tonight?" The first inquiry was made. "Yes. What news?" came the reply. "All right so far. However, there will be some excitement tomorrow. Scuggy has brought news. He needs to converse with the Earl immediately." The three dismounted and commenced on a path that was winding and arduous, densely populated with low-hanging branches and thick brushwood blocking their path. Eventually, they reached the bottom of the ravine, where there was a spacious one-storied building located near the head of the tarn, which was entirely concealed from anyone who skirted along the edge of the woods. As the trio approached the building, they were met with the fierce growling of a watchdog, and were challenged by an unseen individual from behind the thick brushwood. After the issue was resolved, the horses were tethered to trees, and they were led to the rear of the abode along a convoluted pathway. They rapped gently on the door, and a woman's voice called out, but soon the bolts were removed, and they entered what was unmistakably the kitchen quarters. "Has the Earl retired?" inquired Bjorn to his wife. "Yes, long ago. The house has been silent for 2 hours," she replied. After some discussion, it was decided that Ragnvald needed to be summoned. Scuggy briefly related the news to Ragnvald, and the two had a council of war where some suggested evasive strategies. This, however, would expose the truth that they were hiding nearby, and they would undoubtedly be tracked down. Therefore, it was agreed that an act of retaliation was necessary. A notice was immediately sent out to all livestock and non-combatants to stay close, and the able-bodied men were to join the Earl at the cave on Deepdale Head at dawn. Scuggy's mission, having been fulfilled, directed his equine companion towards an open area. In his company was the ever-loyal Grizzly, and they wasted no time in beginning their journey back to the monastery. Their pace was a smooth and unwavering trot, only ceasing when they arrived at their destination. This act served as a crucial advisory to the exiled Saxons, who swiftly grasped its significance. It goes without saying that they utilized the information to their advantage. Chapter 16. Bjarni the Viking. "Let us beware of starting quarrels, but if we find ourselves in the midst of one, let us not falter, for our opponents will be wary of our next move." This warning from Shakespeare is wise counsel for any time, any place. It certainly could have been taken to heart by the hill folk who once lived on the slopes of Hanging Brow Scar, a massive peak that juts out from the Pennine Mountains. Despite its harsh climate, the area was home to a humble people who eked out a living amidst ungiving terrain. Protected by the woods that blanketed the gorges, the hillfolk lived their lives in a perpetual struggle against the relentless winds and snow that battered them from all sides. Yet there was beauty to be found in this wilderness, particularly in summer, when the rich aromas of the plants and streams mingled together in the air. As a man of science and faith, it was my joy and duty to bring comfort and solace to those who lived in isolation and poverty all around me, and who looked to the peaks etched against the sky for hope and inspiration. And how richly was my reward as I gazed out over the valleys and hills and saw the majesty of creation stretching out before me to the very edge of the sea. The lush forest stretched out as far as the eye could see, an unbroken canopy of greenery in myriad hues. Oak, ash, elm, and other species merged their various tints in the lowland, while fir, pine, and mountain ash ringed the forest's higher reaches. Fleet-footed red deer darted through tangled undergrowth, or fed on boulders in the clearings, always keeping watchful eyes on the stealthy hunter. The sly fox roamed here and could be spotted gliding warily through the woods, and occasionally his fiercer cousin the wolf prowled in solitary fierceness. All the while the forest echoed with the songs of its feathered inhabitants, including birds of rare and shy plumage such as the jay, magpie, thrush, curlew, and wood pigeon, as well as many species of hawks. Golden eagles soared in airy flight overhead, circling the trees or perching on rocky outcroppings, while their mates patiently brooded their young in the crevices of the steep cliffs that lined the water's descent. On one momentous day, as the sun emerged over the horizon and set the mountain peak aglow with its scarlet hue, 2 Saxon warriors appeared on the other side of the mountain, girded with battle-axes and broadswords. From this high vantage point, they could just barely make out the fortress and the fertile acres surrounding it. But as the sun climbed higher in the sky, and its radiance illuminated every valley and hillock, the entire panorama lay before them in its full splendor. They saw the castle's noble proportions, the river's serpentine course as it flowed through the woods, and even the magnificent stones of the abbey in the valley below. Though their hearts were heavy, the 2 warriors gazed on, transfixed by the beauty of the vista before them. "Has any man ever been called upon to relinquish such a lovely possession as this, Gorma?" queried the leader of the 2. "Indeed it is a fair sight," replied his companion, "fairer than I ever dreamed it could be. But it may be yours again, and I may reclaim my own little plot of land. So let us not lose heart." "It is uncertain what may come to pass, but it appears highly improbable presently. Let us proceed over the peak and assess our strategy for the fortress. Our foes will likely remain dormant for a while yet, I presume. We shall be notified in due course by our scouts." Following their discussion, the duo ascended the mountain and reviewed their plans for the stronghold, which had been established previously. The summit was a level plateau encompassing approximately 5 or 6 acres. Surrounding the perimeter of the plateau, the ground plunged abruptly and sharply for 50 yards. Scaling this last steep slope required maximum effort. They walked together around the outermost boundary. "My lord," Ragnvald remarked, "this impenetrable rampart could never have been constructed by human hands. Assuming it is gallantly fortified, it cannot be overthrown by an assault. However, there is one potential threat. We may be besieged and starved out, given the difficulty of provisioning this location with our limited resources." "Indeed, you speak the truth," replied his colleague. "We must endeavor to procure provisions diligently while we possess respite. If we can demonstrate our strength today, we shall deter them from attempting to overpower our fortress, unless they are considerably reinforced." "Gorma," Ragnvald interjected, "have you taken notice of the abundant materials nature has provided for construction? There is an abundance of ready-made stones and timber in close proximity." At that moment, a horseman approached from the mile of easy elevation that extended from the forest. "Ragnvald," the pair heard the messenger say, "please be informed that a significant event is unfolding, based on the abundance of individuals that are currently assembling at an early time of day. This is exceedingly uncommon for the Normans, who are inclined to carouse late into the evening and slumber in the morning." "If these drunken fools are stirring this morning," Ragnvald reflected, There must be significant motivation driving their actions. We will go to our rendezvous immediately." Turning to the scout, he inquired, "Are you familiar with the cave at Deepdale Head?" "I am," responded the scout. "You will locate us there henceforth. Keep us informed, you and your companions, so that we may make our arrangements." Then the two rapidly descended until they arrived at the head of a deep ravine, where one of the many limestone caves in the area could be found. It had an obscure and unimpressive entrance, but once within, it took on grand dimensions, stretching away into many spacious and eerie cavities. In the past, no one would have been bold enough to enter its murky confines, as it was believed to be the residence of pixies, witch-hags, and the forces of evil and darkness generally. However, these superstitious and unenlightened individuals had dared to confront the abode of malevolent spirits rather than face the even more callous and reviled Normans. A group of armed men had assembled around the entrance to this cave and were sitting on the hillside, clearly anticipating a confrontation with the adversary. They were a very mixed group, with some appearing to be fierce, ragged, wild, and unsavoury. At the head of 10 or 15 men was a man named Bjarni, who had been a chief in Lakesland, which was 50 miles distant. However, his struggle against the Normans had been so dire and his attacks so bold that they had needed to deploy numerous forces to capture or kill this man and his band of desperadoes. They had not succeeded, but their incessant raids had driven him from his native hills. As a result, he was found at this opportune moment swelling the ranks of Ragnvald's men. "Your arrival is well timed, Jarl," said Ragnvald. "Individuals who can wield a sword or hurl a javelin, as I see you and these rugged warriors can, are doubly appreciated at this crucial juncture." "You're right, master. I'm a Viking through and through, and these men are all skalds, so we won't have to tell you we enjoy the sound of steel. Provide us with a corner where there's enough space to fight and no room to flee, because that's what we prefer." Suddenly, a rider arrived, galloping in haste to deliver news. The Normans had split into two groups and were making their way up the watercourses. This was just as Ragnvald had predicted. The tangled labyrinthine forest offered few continuous paths, with the watercourses being the most viable route. The Normans had made a common but fatal mistake. They had underestimated their enemy, assuming the Saxons to be powerless and unorganized. They had no clue that Ragnvald and his people were not without their courage and determination, and were ready to fight. As time went on, the scouts returned with crucial intelligence about the size and direction of the Norman forces. Splitting themselves into two companies, the Normans intended to comb through both paths along the watercourses, reuniting once they reached the hills. Bjarni was in charge of one group of Saxon fighters at the head of one of the ravines, while Ragnvald and Germa oversaw the other. They carefully moved down the ravine to a spot chosen by Ragnvald, a perfect location for an attack. When the Saxons and Normans eventually clashed, Ragnvald's force was pitted against the larger of the two Norman contingents. The stream had widened into a picturesque, flower-dotted dell, but the white caps that churned atop the water betrayed the rapid descent from the mountains. The Normans convened for a consultation about their future movements. After much deliberation, they resolved to cross to the left bank and ascend the steep slope before them. The Saxons, ever vigilant, observed their adversaries and relayed their approach with remarkable speed. Ragnvald, the Saxon leader, chose a strategic location where the rock face was smooth and vertical, and the creek below ran deep. Across the stream, Germa and his archers lay hidden in ambush. Their elevated position made it impossible for the Normans to dislodge them, while their arrows could rain down upon their foes with deadly precision. Ragnvald and his most stalwart companions stood firm at a narrow point in the path, blocking the Norman advance. A large boulder obscured their view of the oncoming enemy force. With a detachment of men, Ragnvald dispatched them to the wooded incline, concealed from view, and armed with boulders and rocks they could unleash upon the enemy at the opportune moment. The plan was masterful, and victory was within reach if the Saxons showed unwavering fortitude in their defense. "Germa," said Ragnvald, "you comprehend my design, I presume. The path is treacherous, so the foe will be forced into a single-file procession. Your men will hide in the thickets until I raise the signal. Then let the arrows fly. Should they panic and retreat, pursue them and cut them off at the gorge's neck. Remember, battle axes for the underbrush, and broadswords for the open. Move fast and strike hard, and the victory shall be ours." Gormer and his men splashed across the creek and scrambled up the opposite embankment. The two companies aligned along the creek's banks and headed toward their intended point of engagement. The troops quickly arranged for battle, and Gormer edged toward the edge of the cliff, where he could survey the enemy below. From his position high above the chasm, Gormer watched as Ragnvald prepared for battle, his battle-axe at the ready and his shield in hand. The fierce, lion-like warrior was accompanied by a dozen well-trained yeomen, skilled in both war and agriculture, and veterans of many battles against Norman and Dane alike. Gormer observed every detail of the approaching enemy, describing their movements and numbers to Ragnvald before the parley came to an end. Retreating to the nearby thicket, Gormer and his men readied their arrows for the impending fray. The Normans, in contrast, were boisterous and dismissive of their foe, their vulgar speech and laughter revealing their contempt for the Saxons and their confidence in victory. As the enemy drew nearer, Ragnvald and his men shouted their war cry, "Ahoy!" The call was echoed by Gormer's troops and the hidden archers above. Dozens of arrows flew through the air, joined by boulders rolling down the hillside towards the hapless Normans. Ragnvald charged forward, meeting the Norman leader in single combat. The two locked eyes for a moment before the Norman struck, his sword glancing off Ragnvald's shield. But Ragnvald's axe proved too much, shattering the Norman's shield and striking a fatal blow to his head. The Normans were thrown into disarray by the loss of their leader, unable to fight back against the swift strikes of the Saxons and the relentless barrage of arrows and stones. The outcome of the battle was no longer in doubt, as the Saxons dominated the path before them, and the Normans were left defenseless. The timidity of the enemy did not last long, for in a matter of minutes their fear swelled into full-blown panic, and they fled pell-mell towards the valley. The Saxons, quick and unwavering, pursued them with ruthless determination, cutting down scores of Normans as they recklessly dashed towards the castle and the valley. Ragnvald gave a signal, and the Saxons halted their pursuit, returning over the hills to join their comrades blocking the advance of the second Norman troop. Meanwhile, Bjarni, a stout Viking warrior with little strategic ability but unrivaled strength and valor, led a dozen of his own band and less than 20 of Ragnvald's men into close combat with the other Norman group. Although inexperienced in leadership, Bjarni's unmatched toughness and skill with his massive sword wrought havoc upon the opposition. His men, too, with their short swords and gleaming knives, were well suited to this kind of warfare. While Ragnvald relied on careful planning to demoralize the enemy, Bjarni's success hinged solely on the strength and bravery of himself and his companions. Unfortunately, this group was led by Pierre, a tough and wily rogue who was not easily frightened. Any who thought Pierre could be overcome by panic or fear would learn just how mistaken they were. Onward the Normans pressed, never suspecting that the Saxons had an ambush in store for them. The Saxons, underestimated by their foes, let out a war cry that pierced the air and descended upon the unsuspecting Normans. Some ran without even fighting, but the brave Pierre rallied his men with a cry of, "Notre Dame! Have at the dogs! Follow me!" and charged forward with his sword. The burly Viking, Bjarni, mowed down the men-at-arms with ease, while his followers darted from behind boulders, launching surprise attacks on the bewildered Normans. Pierre soon realized that they were outnumbered 5-1, and that if Bjarni were stopped, the Saxons would surely win. So, with bravery and skill, Pierre boldly charged Bjarni, shield and sword ready. Bjarni chuckled at the Norman's temerity, and with great force he swung his weapon at Pierre. But Pierre parried each blow skillfully, shifting his ground to get an advantage. The clash of their weapons boomed through the forest, and Pierre endured the ordeal with unwavering courage. "Bravo, Pierre!" his comrades cheered. "Keep him occupied a little longer, and we'll take care of the rest." Everything points to this conclusion. The Normans had gathered courage, and through sheer numbers, were rapidly overpowering the Saxons. But then, at that moment, the Saxon battle cry echoed through the hills with a resounding, "Ahoy! "Ahoy! Ahoy!" Ragnvald and his men charged into the flanks of the Normans, and the effect was nothing short of electrical. In a panic, the Normans fled before the Saxons' avenging onslaught. It was a regular stampede, and Pierre and his men, along with the stragglers from the first company, rushed breathlessly into the castle yard without ever attempting to rally. Hofsos and Valdis had received the former troop with rage and dismay, and now they were little less than frantic at this double disaster and ignoble defeat. "Pierre, you scurvy villain, what is this?" roared Valdis at his henchmen. "I wish you had left your ugly carcass with those Saxon dogs yonder before you disgraced yourself." "You will take care that fat carcass of yours is not put in any danger, master," Pierre retorted fiercely. "How dare you?" Valdis drew his sword and advanced on Pierre. "I'll put a stop to your insolence, dog." "Stand back." Pierre drew his sword. "You'll have to take your chance. Mark me if you don't put up that weapon. I'll have no more of your bullying. My weapon is as good as yours any day, whether I have won my spurs or not." "Stop that," Hofsos intervened. "Pierre, what has happened?" "Treachery, my lord. The Saxons were aware of our purpose, for they were prepared for us, lying in ambush to receive us. But despite this, we should have bested them. However, when we were just getting the upper hand, Ragnvald and 50 others dashed into our rear and demoralized us entirely. A burly monster, huge as a bull, led the first company. Look at my shield. It was cut through in several places by his weapons. It's evident we were betrayed by someone. They were clearly waiting for us, everything prepared." Thrilled and uplifted were the Saxons by the triumphs of the day. Indeed, it was the first time they had faced off against the Normans since their woeful march through the north, and to hold their own and emerge victorious was a great joy. The renown and bravery of Ragnvald spread rapidly among the hunted refugees who hid like animals in the woods. The haughty, vengeful oppressors received a salutary lesson as they learned to fear and respect the Saxons all the more. Chapter 17. Evil Counsellors. "Lost is all good to me. Evil become my good." Such were the words of Milton, and such were the sentiments of the hapless Saxons, who lived under the ruthless yoke of their Norman oppressors. Count Hofsos and his brethren were not content with mere subjugation, but sought to inflict increased cruelties and indignities upon their subjects. The Saxon women were at the mercy of besotted and degraded Norman troopers, and the lives of the Saxons were of no account whatsoever. Hatred against the Normans burned fiercely in the hearts of the Saxon people. Even the monastery, which had once been a haven for the poor and sick, was not immune to the Norman conquest. The office of abbot was taken from me and given to a Norman father, who was as greedy for the emoluments of the church as his fellow conquerors were for the possessions of the Saxon laymen. The new abbot, Valdis, was a brother of Baron Valdis, and under his rule the Saxons were subjected to degradation and oppression. Despite these trials, I resolved to stay and bear the heavy yoke, for I counted it an honor to suffer like my master. Elfrida Hofsos, a real friend to all who were in suffering and distress, provided friendship and aid to me in my time of need. Some of my subordinates left to seek refuge elsewhere, while others joined forces with outlawed countrymen and became skilled in wielding carnal weapons. But I stayed, bound by my love and affection for my flock. The new abbot was a curious figure, having come to the church from a former career as a soldier. It seemed that he had taken up the calling of the church as a means to satisfy his love of pleasurable living. He neither practiced nor respected the disciplines of the church, and his only devotion was to his own desires. His physical appearance was a contrast to the ideal of a monk, as he was overweight and dressed ostentatiously. He carried a sword, perhaps to ward off any foes, which was concealed by his robes, and was an all-around vain and swaggering man. Though he projected a brave image, in reality he was a coward who enjoyed inflicting pain on those he could easily dominate. The monks in his company followed his example in living lifestyles that were not in accordance with the church's teachings. Most of them were illiterate and could not understand the sacred Latin texts they were meant to study. Their morals were no better than the soldiering class. This situation was regrettable for the ancient monastery, which had a good reputation for piety and learning. In the past, it had offered welcome and sustenance to any pilgrim or troubadour, and had always provided relief to any peasant living in distress. Since the arrival of the Normans, the fortunes of the land were squandered on revelry and debauchery, hosting Norman lowlifes who took advantage of the impoverished Saxons. The poor were left to starve, their farms and homes destroyed. Preaching virtue and chastity fell on deaf ears, as they knew their harvests would be plundered. However, tonight the brothers were discussing weighty matters over wine. "What progress have you made?" the abbot asked. "I have forced the Count to name a day for fulfilling his promise, but his daughter is stubborn," the brother replied. "She makes excuses?" "Yes, she dislikes my manners and is angry about a Saxon girl I took an interest in. She grows more arrogant each day, but I will humble her eventually. I do not know if I love or hate her more. She is a beautiful girl, but I wish to see her pride crushed. Do you think the Count is aware?" "Without a doubt. He would kill me for the letters I possess, but he knows you are also aware of his treachery to William. He will not strike until he has secured those letters. I have concluded that it is safer to hand them over to you than to keep them in my possession. They contain conclusive evidence of his treachery, do they not? There is no mistake about that. They are in his handwriting, sealed with his crest and coat of arms. They offer, on certain considerations, to sell his influence and men to the Saxons during William's absence. He was foolish enough to give me a written promise of his daughter's hand, in exchange for my fidelity to him. The whole thing is clear and straightforward. He now sees that his game is up, but I will show him that my game is not over until he hands over his stately daughter. He must have miscalculated greatly when he put his head in such a noose. Yes, he has not played many false cards in his life, but that was one, and if he doesn't play fair, he will lose his head. I promise him that much. What caused him to quarrel with the king? Oh, jealousy. He believed that he should be high in William's favour and his counsel because of the services he had rendered, and he expected to receive some valuable lands near London. However, William did not think as highly of him, or might have been influenced by a courtesan, which is more probable. As soon as William was firmly on the throne, he gave his cold shoulder to Hofsos, and made Odo, Lanfranc, and Fitzosborne his chosen advisers. Odo and Hofsos had a mortal feud, and Hofsos quickly fell out of favour. William gave him a paltry estate in the Fen country, where the Saxon devil Hereward constantly raided his territory. The slight he received rankled, and when the insurrection broke out while William was in Normandy, Hofsos's cunning failed him for once. The Saxons took York, put to the sword the garrison of 3,000 Normans, and the Danes swarmed into the Humber ripe for plunder. The Ethelreda came in from Scotland, and the wily Hofsos was at a loss. He surmised success was within grasp for his endeavour. But alas, the full potential of the plan was thwarted by the opposition of the devil's preferred confidant, William. He dispatched me with letters to Osborne and the others, offering his troops in exchange for compensation. In addition to his desire for profit, he harboured a thirst for retribution against his adversaries in court. I did not make the rash decision to involve myself immediately upon arrival in York. Prudence was of the utmost importance. If Hofsos was willing to risk his well-being to satisfy his thirst for vengeance, I was not so willing to throw caution to the wind. I wavered upon seeing Osborne, and in the meantime William hustled his way across the Channel and, with skilful manipulation, bought off the treacherous Danes. Osborne, a double-crossing coward, succumbed to the same persuasion soon after, and the Ethelreda fled to Scotland at top speed. The plan was foiled. Some of the smaller chieftains, including the Saxon Ragnvald, held their ground and fought valiantly, but it was merely a passing fad. I contemplated the idea of pursuing an enterprise of my own. The benefits of following Hofsos were dwindling. I had hoped my close allegiance with him would result in a fair share of the spoils of war and a betrothal to his daughter. However, I had begun to see that she was not all sugar and spice, and convincing her to agree to the union would prove arduous. I told him I had given the letters to my brother, who was a part of the church and highly esteemed by Lanfranc. This fabricated story ultimately resulted in your esteemed appointment. I remind Hofsos of the letters I possess, figuratively flashing them before him, as leverage to ensure he fulfills his promise soon and brings his daughter to her senses. The process causes him distress, but I will carry it out, with even greater efficacy if his word remains unfulfilled." "Well, brother," said the Baron, throwing the letters across the table, "let's pour some good old wine. Preaching is a thirsty business. By the way, do you know what's happened to that beautiful Saxon girl I met here before? I had no idea they could breed such fine cattle among these simple folk. Have you seen her since you arrived?" "No, I haven't seen her. But I've heard that sly old snake Adhelm knows more about her whereabouts. I would have gotten rid of him long ago, but Elfrida, that minx, has been protecting him. I suspect he's allied with the enemies on the hill and causing trouble among our own. Keep an eye on those letters, brother. I'll feel much safer once they're out of my hands." Chapter 18. Love is stronger than hate. Love, a gift bestowed by the divine upon humanity alone, a link of silver, tie of silk, a secret bond, binding hearts and minds, bodies and souls as one. The morning air is calm and serene in August's embrace. Cattle bask in the shade of plenteous plantain, while the occasional deer ventures from the forest edge into view, seeking mankind's presence amidst the dangers of the wood. This peaceful morning has brought forth 2 women from the castle, making their way towards a little riverbank house where 2 boats sit. The smaller vessel graced with fine craftsmanship and silken oar handles, meant for delicate use. Elfrida adores this little journey, a brief respite on the tranquil river with Mireille rowing, while Elfrida reads or savours the picturesque scenery around her. The sound of Mireille's oars moving against the currents is music to the soul. To drift with quietude downstream, beneath the high banks where buzzing insects and leaping trout dwell, breathing in the fragrance of shrubs, blooms, and trees of the forest. To the nature lover, a wood scent is of the Lord's ample blessing. This day, every treasure of nature shines exceptionally bright, and even Mireille's leisurely pace contributes to the rapid departure of the park, the castle now completely concealed by the woodland's enclosure. "We are beyond the park's limits, my lady," Mireille declares. "Shall I turn the boat and let the stream carry us home?" "Wait, Mireille," Elfrida exclaimed. "Let us journey onwards a bit longer today. This morning is a delightful one, and I'm filled with a longing to explore more of this charming river." "But, my lady, you should remember the Count's strict orders. He warned us not to venture past the site of the castle," Mireille replied. "Do not fret, Mireille. I believe we can safely venture a bit farther. We have never encountered another human being on any of our previous excursions," Elfrida assured her. "Mistress, you are aware of the Saxon savages and their wicked ways. They may be hidden in the woods, ready to attack us with their arrows, and no help in sight," Mireille cautioned. "I highly doubt we have any foes among the Saxons, Mireille. You and I don't deserve their hatred, and I am willing to place trust in them," Elfrida responded. "But it is a dangerous risk, my lady," Mireille protested. "Paul Lazaire told me the Saxons eat people they capture." "Fiddlesticks, Mireille. You are such a scaredy-cat and a fool to believe all the frightening rumours you hear about the Saxons. Look how serene and stunning the river appears before us. Let us continue a bit further upstream." Truly, Elfrida was accurate in describing the utter beauty of the scene. Gigantic mountains extended their summits down to the river's edge, and dense woods appeared impenetrable at the river's edge. The towering trees on both sides of the river stretched their limbs across the water as though seeking to greet their colossal neighbours on the other side. Ahead, the twists and turns of the river were obscured from view, but it seemed as if the water was emerging from the heart of the mountainous promontory before them, covered in thick foliage. As they progressed on their journey, they encountered harsh limestone crags that jutted out from the slender covering of the green fir tree tops that futilely strove to conceal them. The lonely, fearsome, and mighty solitude of the area enveloped Elfrida, stirring her soul, oblivious to anything other than the melody of nature. As the watercraft and its occupants make their gradual ascent along the river's current, a multitude of gallinules bolts into the impenetrable depths of verdure and vegetation. The feathered bipeds hastily submerge themselves beneath the roots of trees or jutting embankments when avoiding the incoming interlopers. Over yonder, situated in the bared and contorted roots of a gargantuan tree that overhangs the water, an otter perches vigilantly, scrutinizing his finned prey frolicking about beneath. However, upon spotting these unwelcomed invaders, he descends from his arboreal pulpit in a rapid slide, concealing his whereabouts except for the aqueous trail that indicates his direction of escape, blurring in the water. Undaunted, upstream, a flock of mallards skims the crystalline flow, blithely oblivious of peril, and squawking voraciously with joy and contentment. But upon this unforeseen encroachment, they sound a startled alarm, rapidly take to their wings, and vanish promptly into the distance. At the entrance of that watery conduit as well, which spills over its stony bed, rolling down from the hills, a heron stands solemnly, observant of any unwary trout that will stray away from the deep waters towards the mountain stream's banks for sustenance. Yet, interrupted, he screams and spreads his extensive wings out with a slow, measured flap, rising upwards into the blue yonder, perhaps halting only after reaching the distant shoreline. Birds of fire-coloured plumage, the kingfishers, haunt tranquil stretches of the river, flitting across the surface with an assurance that belies their size. Snipes, also, are abundant in numbers, darting ahead upstream with a direct arrow-like dash or soaring high above the treetops before circling back towards the stern of the boat. Elfrida is elated, oblivious both to Mireille's entreaties and admonishments, her ears deaf to everything except the harmonious melodies of nature. Observe, Mireille, those splendid clusters of ripe russet hazelnuts that hang there. Come alongside immediately and let us gather them. Mireille's panic and warnings are swiftly vanquished at the sight of this tantalizing prospect, and the command is given and obeyed with eagerness. Excitedly, the duo rises to their feet in the boat, disregarding the dangers that threaten as they extend their arms towards the glowing orbs bursting with life. The boat's chain is boldly fastened around a tree's bole, and with nimble feet and fingers the nutters strip tree after tree, filling their hands with the delicious bounty. Unbeknownst to them, however, 2 pairs of Saxon eyes have been intently watching their progress upstream. Approaching them unnoticed, Ragnvald and his comrade Gormer surprise the women, causing Mireille to scream and narrowly escape hysterics. Calming the ladies, Ragnvald expresses his gratitude for their past act of kindness, assuring them that despite their appearance as rude and uncivilized islanders, the Saxons are not unappreciative of favours bestowed upon them, especially those such as theirs. Elfrida assures Ragnvald of her intuition of mercy, prompting his gratitude and desire to repay the debt some day. The ladies express their relief at not being met with hostility, to which Ragnvald assures their safety, allowing them to roam at will with no danger from his people. "This river view is truly mesmerizing, my dear knight. May I request your kind hospitality and indulge in an exploration of the area?" The river's serenity becomes even more sublime as we venture into solitude. If our vessel wasn't so delicate, we'd have given you an exhilarating ride upstream. But if you are willing to trust a Saxon, I can assure you a rare spectacle. My companion, Gormer, shall accompany your maid while we're gone. I'm willing to take the risk, and it would be unethical for you to break a woman's trust. But is it prudent to leave Mireille behind? Absolutely. Gormer and the faithful hound are skilled guardians. I implore you not to embark on this endeavour. The Saxons are known to devour people," Mireille cried out in terror. "Don't be foolish, dear Mireille. Such rumours are baseless and untenable," the knight assured her. "But I fear for my safety. Holy Mother, protect me," Mireille said frantically, clutching her rosary. "Relax, my fine lady," Gormida said soothingly. "Even if I were a cannibal, I'd refrain from eating you. Just sit on that log. The hound and I will keep at a safe distance." He then began playing with his dog, leaving Mireille alone. "Just don't eat her, Gormer, or else you'll have to answer to me when we return," the knight joked as they ventured off. Left alone, Mireille sat and watched the boat drift away, praying fervently. Gormer ignored her and kept playing with the hound. With no impending dangers, Mireille started casting glances at her Saxon mate. Gradually, she stopped sobbing and counting rosary beads and found herself drawn towards the enigmatic Saxon. Her curiosity was immediately sparked, quickly turning into admiration for Gormer's muscular limbs and well-built physique. It was not common for many women, especially flirtatious Frenchwomen like herself, to come across such an impressive example of human anatomy without being in awe. Gormer, despite his feigned indifference, noticed her reaction. Eventually he turned his gaze towards Mireille and couldn't help but grin. His grin gradually spread into a broad smile as he broke the silence. "I hope you won't run off while I gather some sticks for the fire, my lovely." "The fire? Why do you need a fire?" Mireille exclaimed, clutching the beads that had fallen into her lap. "I can't eat you raw now, can I?" Gormier teased, before twirling on his heel to laugh uproariously. Mireille let out an adorable little scream. "You're a horrible man. I'll jump into the water if you move. I just know I will." Then, between smiles and tears, she added, "You're trying to frighten me, but I know Saxons eat people. I've heard it countless times. And on our way here we saw a pile of bones that Paul Lazaire said were those of people eaten by Saxons, so I know all about you. You mustn't believe everything you hear, my pretty one. You'll be my sweetheart, and I'll show you that we Saxons are not so barbaric," Gormara replied. "I'm not going to be your sweetheart, not with your hair and beard so long." "Normans won't wear such horrible beards," Mireille retorted. "You can cut my hair and trim my beard to look like a Norman if you wish. I'd do anything to make you feel comfortable around me," Gormer offered. Mireille privately thought that she preferred him just the way he was, but she didn't say it out loud. Eventually, Gormer and Mireille found themselves sitting side by side on a fallen tree, with the hound at their feet. Neither was eager for the return of the boat and its occupants. "So it has been spoken that we partake in similar sustenance, my dear? And I imagine you weren't especially fond of me calling you sweetheart. I observed you fighting on that wall, and I can tell you recognize me." "I can confirm that is true. I'm named Mireille, but that's not of importance to you." "No need for offence, my dear. May I inquire as to what they call you?" "They refer to me as Mireille, and it carries no weight for you." "How dreadful indeed. They proclaim that we ingest the same food as those like you." "That is accurate, and it's true as well, as everyone confirms. That's most concerning regardless. May I inquire how many people similar to yourself I might have consumed?" "You wouldn't want to partake in something like me. If you did, Paul Lazaire would murder you." "Ah, Paul Lazaire. I assume he is someone you fancy. Is this true, dear Mireille?" "That is correct, but I will not be getting hitched to him regardless, just to make that clear. I have no intentions of getting involved with him, that's for sure. You can inform him that you have found someone better, a Saxon." "Pardon me, that's absurd. Can you even imagine? I have no intentions of marrying anyone. They are unpleasant creatures who are only satisfied when they are imbibing ale. Just the thought of marrying a Saxon is ludicrous." "My sweet Mireille, I must confess that I am completely infatuated with you. If you were to be my spouse, I would ensure your every need was addressed. Being married to a Saxon. How about no thank you? Just the thought of it is repulsive. Do I look like someone who spends the day roaming around the forest wearing sheepskin? Do I look like someone who dwells inside a hole in the ground at night? I think not." Gormer erupted in boisterous laughter. "Do you perhaps prefer sleeping in a tree instead of hiding in a hole?" "Neither option is acceptable. And for all I know, you could already have a Saxon wife, since you Normans and Saxons are all deceitful." "Don't be absurd, Mireille. I don't have a wife, or even a sweetheart for that matter. I've decided that my future spouse will be Norman just like you." "Why on earth would someone as gargantuan as you want to be married to someone like me?" "Why? It's an inquiry that cannot be readily answered, I assure you. But perhaps it's due to the allure of your charming countenance, the gracefulness of your figure, or maybe even some inexplicable force that is beyond my comprehension. Nevertheless, never before have I experienced such an intense attraction. For the moment my eyes fell upon your visage, I knew that I desired to kiss it." "Oh, you terrible, mischievous man!" Mireille scolded, intertwining her slender hand with Gormer's massive paw, while unintentionally scooting closer to him upon the log. "You're attempting to trick me with such nonsense. I perceive right through your deception. Where might we reside? I'm clueless as to where you currently live. I would perish if I had to reside in a forest without a home. I long for a place of my own where I can play my guitar, spin my wool, and craft better wear for you than those rough garments you don." I won't allow you to become my spouse until I've found a home for you and provided you with protection. We'll likely need to teach the Normans a couple of more lessons before they'll listen to sanity. Once we establish a settlement of our own, then you'll be my wife, Mireille. Oh, but I'm too scared of living amongst the Saxons. You wouldn't cause any harm to a little woman such as me, would you? That would be quite cowardly. I concur, Mireille, replied Gorma, wrapping his arm around her delicate waist, pulling her close and planting a kiss on her radiant cheek. When I go to battle, I'd rather have a stronger adversary to seek vengeance upon. But will you be a serf and wear those dreadful iron collars that serfs wear? I don't want a husband who is a bondman. No, my sweet, I've never been a bondman, and more importantly, I never will be. I am a Saxon freeman. A freeman? What is a freeman? A freeman is someone who cultivates their own land and is not bound to anyone. I shall always be a freeman, and my descendants shall continue as freemen after me. At this moment the hound sprung up, his eyes wide and his growl low and menacing. Suddenly, a set of footsteps loudly crashed through the trees and brush, not stealthy or swift. Gormar leapt to his feet, already fitting an arrow to his bowstring. The hound rose with him, its veins and tendons bulging as it watched the intruder. The low-hanging branches rattled as Bjarni, a powerful but deposed Viking chieftain, appeared before them, his brow etched with anger. "Gormar!" he boomed. "What is the meaning of this?" "I am sorry, my lord," replied Gormar. "I do not understand. The foolishness that I have seen for the past hour, it is more fitting for a Norman dissolute than a Saxon warrior like yourself." "I apologize, but I do not comprehend what you are referring to. You consort with the Norman women, while we Saxon warriors seek vengeance for the 1,000 Saxons they killed. But enough of it. Put an end to it. Eliminate this woman and your folly with one blow, and you will be forgiven." "I will do no such thing. This woman and her noble mistress gave my master his life, and I warn you to touch neither of them." Gormar defiantly placed himself before Bjarni. "Who cares for the scruples of your master? These Normans will pay for what they have done to our people. Stand aside, I will do it myself," he threatened. "That will not happen until you have dealt with me first," Gormar declared, blocking Bjarni's path. "So insolent! I will teach you a lesson." Bjarni reached for his sword. Seeing the threat, Gormar jumped on the chieftain and delivered a stinging punch. The impact sent the fighter flying. "Ah, that's it! Now I'll teach you with your own weapon, you varlet," Bjarni said, grabbing his sword. With great determination, the man charged towards Gormar in an effort to engage him in hand-to-hand combat. However, Gormar was well aware of his opponent's immense physical strength and cleverly dodged every attempt Bjarni made to get a grip on him, simultaneously delivering devastating punches with his fists. These strikes enraged Bjarni, causing him to act like a raging bull. For a period of time, it was as if it were a duel between brute force and flexibility, with agility prevailing. Suddenly, Gormar stumbled over a tree root, granting Bjarni the opportunity he had been relentlessly seeking. In an instant, Bjarni intensely gripped Gormar with his powerful arms, lifting him up like a child and violently slamming him onto the ground. "I will now kill you, you peasant!" Bjarni exclaimed as he clutched Gormar's neck with his hand. In the midst of the fight, a hound that had been circling the fighters throughout the battle made a rash decision and sank his teeth into the meaty portion of Bjarni's arm upon witnessing Gormar's perilous situation. Chapter 19. Elfrida Hofsós and the Saxon Chieftain. Love, according to Shakespeare, is a feeling which is not seen by the eyes, but rather through the mind. Cupid, the messenger of love, is often depicted as blindfolded to symbolize this fact. The boat, ridden by Ragnvald and Elfrida, surged through the breathtaking landscape. "What say you, my lady? Was I right to extol the beauty of this land?" "Indeed. This would be a paradise if humans were not so selfish and cruel. The forest is grander than any other place I have seen. Or perhaps it is just that it matches my preferences so well. It is with reluctance that I speak of this, but I confess, lady, that I am hopelessly enamored with you. Although I wish your people could remain here for a long time, I also long to call this land mine once again. I may be content with the idea of exile if you shall be its mistress, and I shall be allowed to gaze upon a beauty that I have grown to cherish more than my own freedom and home. But I must tell you, a Norman knight has claimed your hand. My father has promised me to one of his knights, but I do not consent to this betrothal, if I may speak freely to you. In truth, this union is quite hateful and abhorrent to me. If I am allowed, I would much prefer to reside in a convent back in my homeland, rather than tie the knot with a man who is incapable of earning my love or my respect, like Baron Valdis. I fear I have overstepped my bounds by interfering in your affairs, which is quite personal. However, I would like to believe and hope that the Count will not obligate you to wed someone you do not love. It would be a cruel act to disregard your affections. My father is a warrior, Sir Knight, and he is calloused by his experiences. He does not have space for sentiments in his character. In recent times, I have observed a melancholy disposition descending upon him. On this matter he is more firm and commanding than ever before, causing me to lose hope and falter. Undoubtedly I find myself in dire straits. As for your appearance, though it may be an unwarranted affair, I perceive that it emanates from goodwill, which I greatly appreciate. I wish that I could express to you, fair lady, how deeply I would be honored to aid you in any way possible. My men, my resources, and my life are all available to you, without reservation or hesitation. I do not seek to exaggerate, and I give you my word of honor. I would be pleased to accept you as my comrade and confidant, for I am utterly isolated. Except for my trusty servant, I am downtrodden and wrestle against the iron-willed force of my father and Valdis. Even if I somehow escape from Valdis's machinations, a stronger force will be required to rescue you. I am nothing more than an outlawed Saxon, a homeless, penniless predator. However, should you have a task for me to undertake, my strength and sword are both sharp and fierce. With patience, I believe that I might be able to free you from the lifelong agony of a marriage with Valdis. I know enough about him to deduce that you two share few, if any, interests or dispositions. I must be cautious in my words, however, as my imprudent heart may override my common sense in these trying times. Please, noble knight, there is no need to apologize for your misfortunes. A respected knight who has been robbed of his possessions endures neither humiliation nor disgrace in my eyes. Gold and land are superficial and transitory things compared to morality and righteousness. Which do you think a simple-minded woman like myself holds in higher regard?
My dear debtor, you claim, forsooth, then I have a venture that will surely test not only your intellect, but your skill as well. Throughout the ages, noble knights have wrought wondrous deeds for damsels in distress, or so the romantics tell us. Is it but a mere fable? I shan't feign ignorance of your jargon, but I do present you with a challenge. Succeed with ease, Sir Knight, and yet the prize may prove fleeting. This high-born maiden was both cultured and virtuous, with the femininity of youth to further highlight her worth. Then as now, these qualities were rare treasures, and the hearts of few men were truly worthy of attaining them. Does it require great artfulness, cunning, or trickery, the way one might ensnare a wild, unruly colt? Nay, when such love is gained, it is but a simple matter, free of siege or strategy. All such machinations can only lead to defeat, as true love cannot be bought or haggled over. It is instead a burst of the highest, purest, most tender and most trusting emotions a woman can feel, all directed towards the one man capable of unlocking them and unleashing the boundless treasures of her soul. But what is required for such love to flourish? I say these qualities are absolute, to have broad, unyielding strength that offers constant and unwavering support, an integrity that knows no bounds, measuring far beyond the limits of discretion or prudence, a heart that is wholly unclouded, without any hint of suspicion or secrets, a spirit that is pure and honest, and where nothing is hidden. When these virtues are in full bloom, any woman can readily see them with a clear eye, and her heart's sanctuary can be won with ease and purity, without any demands for capitulation. More hearts have been won in less time than the jaded skeptics allow, but it is the affinity with the divine within us that is the ultimate reward, although so few mortals possess it. Upon hearing these words, Ragnvald sprang up as though charged by lightning, grasped the hilt of his sword. "Please believe me, dear lady," he spoke. "Never before have I imbibed the delicious nectar of such blessedness. The debt of gratitude I owe you for saving me from certain death is enough to invigorate my being and empower me to do anything for you. If there is even a shred of hope that I can win your heart,
That thought alone will give me the strength to overcome any obstacle and emerge victorious." "I must warn you, Sir Knight," Elfrida replied. "The challenges ahead of you will demand unparalleled skill, courage, and perhaps your life. The bond you seek to sever is unholy and hated. You will need a sharp sword indeed." She hesitated, her cheeks flushing crimson red before uttering, "Forgive me if I offend your sense of propriety, but I must ask for your guidance once again." "I would never presume to force you to confide in me, fair maiden," he said, "but I trust in your judgment to do what's best for you." With a deep breath, Elfrida divulged her father's secret and trembled as she recounted the story of her woes. "The dastardly Baron Valdis has my father in his iron grip," she said. "He possesses a trove of documents that could ruin my father, including a promise my father made to him long ago. The Baron uses these papers like a weapon, threatening to destroy us all if I do not marry him," she explained. Her voice grew faint, and she sagged against the door, her eyes filled with tears. "I fear my father is lost to us forever,"